The 8.5 by 11 annotated constitutions.
Does it count if I left mine at home?
It doesn't count if you left yours at home. But for anyone who did not get one, I got 5 or 6 copies. Who else did not? 1, 2, 3, 4. Brad, if y'all split one, I'll get another one next week. Okay.
But I've got what you're saying.
You know, I can email it to anybody. You'll have copies of it.
So you don't need it. I don't know what's going on with my computer as far as. No, now it's going to go.
Oh gosh, did it come out second? It's just the last 2 pages.
Probably because you finished typing is all those.
Who over here never got one? Those are the just $1. Is there anyone here that has not ever received one of these annotated ones? Okay. Everybody needs I'd like everyone to have a copy of that. We're going to be using it tonight. I'd also, we watched that video last week, and somebody was talking about the segments. I had forgotten, I've watched that thing so many times and used it for some classes, but I had forgotten that there's 5 lessons in there where they go back and kind of set things up. There's a lot of good information that we just don't have time. We watch the thing quickly. I recommend highly that you take the video when you have time and interest, and just go back on the menu. Instead of just play movie, that you can play the lessons as it's set up and so on. But the lesson 1, and it starts out to give you some real good background to what's happening here when it's getting started and so on. And then lesson 2 is set up for the next part of the movie and so on. If you didn't get a movie, we ran out of them last week. We had about 30 of them. I bought 50 more. So if you want one or more, please just take them. Put $1 there. If you don't have $1, bring $1 sometime. But I really would like everyone to take one of those and have them. I guess it's 7 o'clock, so we should go ahead and get started. And Matt, would you lead us in let's have a prayer. Maddie, would you pray for us? And then Matt, if you will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, okay? All right.
Dear Heavenly Father, we're very grateful that we're able to come here today to learn about our Constitution and the founding of our country and all the blessings that the Founding Fathers meant for us to have. We ask Thee to bless Professor Drashel with the knowledge of how to explain the things that he wants to explain to us, and that we might be able to listen and to learn, that our minds and our intellects might be touched, we might be able to understand and know how to apply these truths that we learn to our own personal lives. We ask Thee to bless those in the service of our country, that they may be protected, and bless those of us here at home, that we may know how to protect our freedoms in our country as well. We thank Thee for this opportunity to learn, and we ask for Thy Spirit to be with us this day as we learn these truths. And we say these things in Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Chris, get the flag. I'm trapped.
All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, I've been looking forward to this. We're finally really getting to the substance of the Constitution. And this week we're talking about, the word is federalism. And we've got a glossary. I've redone the glossary. But the truth is, we could do it today if all we put on there was just the 10th Amendment versus Article 1, Section 8, national powers, state powers. And I've arranged it on your glossary there so that, kind of in the order that makes sense for me, starting off with state sovereignty and the 10th Amendment, then national sovereignty. together. We call that dual sovereignty. Here's how it works. To begin with, we had 13 sovereign states. They had 100% of the power. The people in the 13 states, they were sovereign. And as you've seen in there, the people were loyal to their states, to their colony. You saw in the Virginia House of Burgesses, which is their legislature there, how Richard Lighthorse, Henry Lee was saying, you know, we're Virginians first and last, and as a whole, the country felt that way also. And that's why we ended up with that Articles of Confederation, which was a weak, useless, nothing national government that we had from when it was ratified in 1781 until the new Constitution was ratified in 1788. And so for 7 years we had that Articles of Confederation, and we had nothing. But before that, the 13 states that had 100% of the power, and I want to emphasize that right now because as we talk about Article 1, Section 8 versus the 10th Amendment. And so these states that had 100% of the power, I keep emphasizing, said, okay, now we're going to create a national government. And national government, we're going to give you some, as Madison said, specific, limited, finite number of powers. And they did that in Article 1, Section 8. If you would turn to Article 1, Section 8, and you're just, so that you have it there in front of you. The Article 1, as you remember, there's 7 articles. And Article 1 tells about the legislative. And it says all legislative powers are going to be in a Congress, it's a House and a Senate. It tells about how they're going to be elected every 2 years for the House and 6 years for the Senate. And then you go over to Section 8. And I've added in there, that's the lawmaking authority of Congress. It's not just the lawmaking authority of Congress, it's the lawmaking authority of the entire government. And so, think about it. You might think about, well, is there some other places in the Constitution where someone is allowed to make law? Well, gee, it talks about the president somewhere being able to write treaties, but it says that the president has to get the approval of the lawmaking authority. It's got to be ratified by 2/3 ratification of the Senate, just like Obama right now has supposedly written this agreement with Iran. Originally, he said, you just have to trust me. It's not written down, but from what you're getting in the reports now, it sounds like that it's written down, maybe. Is it going to be ratified by 2/3 of the Senate? I haven't had time to even listen. I heard that the Senate, one of the leaders was crowing today as if there's great progress been made and so on. But the bottom line is, in order for it to be legally binding, to be constitutional, to be the supreme law of the land, according to Article 6 of the Constitution, the Supremacy Clause, it says the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and laws passed by Congress and treaties that are ratified by the Senate are the supreme law of the land. A lot of times presidents will just do what's called, not a lot of times, but sometimes they'll do what's called an executive agreement. It's an unsigned treaty, therefore it's an unratified treaty. It doesn't have constitutional power, but in practicality, he is the president. If he says to Iran, I will not blockade you if you will do such and such, and then they just do it. Well, an executive agreement only has power as long as the president is in office. Once he's out of office, that executive agreement, that unsigned, unratified, non-constitutionally binding treaty has no effect. I cannot imagine, by the way, what's going to happen on this treaty with Iran, where immediately you have Obama and his people say, this is what the treaty says, and it's a good deal, and you have the head guy over there, head Kerry from us, Secretary of State, and their foreign minister, what do they call it, saying exactly the same things. And no, it doesn't do this, this, and this. And he says, oh, Obama's lying, it's not this. How in the world is the Senate ever going to ratify something that the two parties don't even agree on what they've agreed upon? It is amazing. But I digress. So Article 1, Section 8 is the lawmaking power of Congress, and it lists, there are 18 clauses. The first 17 clauses list a bunch of specific things that we kind of marched through before. But let's look at, I've highlighted, they can do various kind of taxes and duties and imports to pay the debts of the United States and for the general welfare of the United States. Those have to be uniform. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but you could not have direct taxes on people. That wasn't until the 16th Amendment that we had to amend the Constitution to allow a direct income tax. And I asked the question again that we asked last week: how in the world did we get along for 140 years, from 1776 to 1913, I think roughly 140 years, something like that. How do we do that? How do we become the greatest, most powerful nation on the earth? Clearly we were. World War I proved that. Richest, most prosperous, generous. How did we become that without having a federal income tax? Well, we did it by obeying the Constitution. In the first place, the national government didn't do that stuff that the Constitution did not allow them to do. They left it to the states and the people, as the 10th Amendment said. And they let the rest of the world, for the most part, and commerce, pay for the costs of our government. And it went just fine. And we didn't have the kind of debt that we have now. I'm not sure if we had any debt, but I'm not a historian. Pardon?
Huh.
What?
You're not sure if we have any debt? I just laughed.
No, I meant if we had any debt in 1913 when we started with the income tax. Okay, so in Article 1, Section 8, we have these specific things. Looking at them, they can, our Congress, therefore our national government, can borrow money, they can regulate commerce. It says with foreign nations, that's foreign commerce. Among the several states, that's interstate commerce. We'll talk about that tonight. Naturalization, border stuff, bankruptcies, coin money, regulate the value thereof, standard weights and measures, laws about counterfeiting, post offices, patents is the next thing, patent, service marks and so on. Next page, laws about piracies and felonies on the high seas, to declare war. That's a power that Congress has. The President does not have power. I know we've been doing it. Bush did it. Obama's doing it without the authorization of Congress. To grant letters of marque and reprisal, to raise and support armies and navy, by extension the Air Force and so on, suppress insurrections, organize, arm, and discipline the militia, whatever that is, we'll talk. The District of Columbia, they have authority. They have authority. They didn't want to have king's government, a king's forest again, because with a king's forest, the king could give that out to his barons and lords and get political support and patronage and raise money for his wars and so on. And so they said, one thing we do not want in America is a king's forest. Government can only land, and the Constitution only allows our national government to own 4 types of land or control. One is the Washington, D.C., the 10 square mile seat of government, and one is postal roads, another is military reservations, and another is the territories of the United States, like Guam and Virgin Islands and so on, can exercise authority in those areas. People, villages. And then the 18th clause says, necessary and proper. Congress can make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, the previous 17 clauses, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States. So that's the necessary clause that we'll talk about. So the state said, we who have 100% of the power, national government, will give you some specific limited powers. And then in the 10th Amendment, let's turn to the 10th Amendment, please. Go back after the signatures on just after Article 7, the ratification process. Names of the signatures. And then because it was ratified in 1788, they got 9 of them. 1789, they got all 13 of the states. And then by 1791, all of the first 10 amendments were ratified. So in these amendments, turn to Amendment 10, the state said, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution. What are the powers delegated to the United States by the Constitution? Where are they found? They're found here in Article 1, Section 8, for the most part. There are a few other places in the Constitution, but in those places, they still got to get these guys authority. This is the lawmaking authority of the U.S. Congress. And in the 10th Amendment, they said, we had 100% to begin with. We gave you some specific limited things over which you now have sovereignty. We call that national sovereignty. National sovereignty. And then they said, 10th Amendment, powers not delegated to the United States nor prohibited to it by the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So they reserve, we call that reserved powers. Reserved powers. They reserved, how much did they, Madison said, these are specific, limited, and he said these are not specific and they're unlimited. We're going to talk about what some of these reserved powers are. They said we're keeping everything else. Everything else. I tend to underline it. And so the state said, we had 100% power, we gave you some specific things. Some other words that we didn't put on here is national sovereignty. Remember the very first week that we talked about sovereignty, what's the sovereign? The sovereign is the boss. There's nobody above the boss. God is the sovereign, but He made us sovereigns when He made us free. When He gave us unalienable rights, He made us, we the people, the source of law. He made us the sovereigns. He made us the political gods here on earth. He delegated one of the powers of God to us, the authority to be the source of law. And why He did that, your guess is as good as mine, but it certainly expressed confidence in us. And I believe that He knew it was the only way that we could grow and become what we needed to be. And He made us the sovereigns here. And so we said the sovereigns are the power. There's nobody above the sovereigns, and no man is above the law. Each of us is a sovereign, and yet we call it, we say national sovereignty, and over here state sovereignty. How can you have nobody above the other one and have, sorry, I hope you can read that. How can you have states that are sovereign and a nation that is sovereign? We talked about that before, and the answer is they're sovereign in the areas that the Constitution says they're sovereign. Our national government is sovereign on all these areas, having an army and navy, and letters of marque with Proslin, and declaring war. The states can't do that. Coining money and regulate the value thereof. States can't do that. They are sovereigns. They're above the states on that. The states are sovereign in everything else. And so if y'all will help me just off the top of your heads again, what are some of those areas that the states are sovereign in? That are not meant, we've talked about some of these. What are some of the areas that the states are sovereign in? They're not, it's not listed here. Family law.
Criminal law.
What?
Criminal law.
Yeah, let me write that over here. States sovereign. The national government has no business, they have no constitutional authority in these areas because it's not even, if you could fit it into one of their categories, then maybe so. But there's nothing in there about family law, marriage, divorce, adoptions, family law. What else?
Education.
I got my list here. Education. Anyone ever heard of Common Core? That's one of the battles that's going on right now. Goals 2000, No Child Left Behind, all these federal programs. Today we have Common Core. The idea being that the national government says we've got to make sure that there's a certain outcomes, like outcome-based education, but that there are certain outcomes so these people can be ready to go to college and it'll be good for everyone, rather than the states deciding, Tim.
How many gallons it takes to flush a commode? That's a federal deal now, you know.
Light bulb?
That is those are federal.
Or light bulbs for that matter.
Oh, heavens to Betsy, yes, can't have any incandescent bulbs. I mean, can you imagine? Okay, education, that's just speeding it up here. Welfare, there's nothing in the national government. There's no, welfare, what else?
Food and drug laws.
Yeah, what would that come in under? Food and drug. Food and drugs. It comes under the FDA.
The environment?
Just go down that
The
line.
environmental laws. But we got an interior department, we got an environmental czar, environment, agriculture, criminal. Good, that's a big one. I mean, they're all big ones. But criminal law, police powers, criminal law. The national government, police powers. The police powers are the power of government to make sure that the general health and welfare and well-being of the nation, of the people are taken care of, and they didn't want to give that to the national. They didn't want to have a national police. We don't have a. Is it the Gestapo or the SS that was the national police? Gestapo. We don't want to have a Gestapo here. And yet Obama, I'm not picking on Obama, he's just the president that we have right now. Obama said when he came in, one of his 13 major goals was to get rid of, I'm sorry, that was white ownership of radio stations. That worries me. He said he wanted to have a national police force that was equally or better armed than the U.S. military. Is that scary? I hope it's criminal law, police power, what else? Family law, inheritance laws. Inheritance laws. You want the national government being. If someone can say, well, that falls under one of these categories in here, then maybe we could take it off. But I'm just telling you, these are ones that are pretty much agreed upon. Education. Do we have a Department of Education? Is there a Secretary of Education? I think it was.
Employment law.
Huh?
Employment law.
Yeah. Ted Bell was appointed to be the Secretary of Education under Ronald Reagan, and Reagan had said, education is one of the things we better get the national government out of. It's not in the Constitution, and it's bad for us anyway on the merits. And so Ted Bell, they showed up for the first, I mean, it's just an anecdote, I suppose it's true, I've heard him say it. And they showed up there and they had a big table with all the different cabinet members' names on them and chairs and so on. There was nothing there for somebody, it was just a mistake. They left out and didn't have a chair for him, and he just kind of quipped that, well, I knew we were going to get rid of me, but I didn't know it was going to be this fast. Well, it was just a mistake, and they got a chair for him and got a sign for him, and they never got rid of the Department of Education because Reagan couldn't get the national government, the ones who had the authority to change the laws, to get rid of it. I don't know why they didn't challenge it in court and get the U.S. Supreme Court to get rid of it. I don't know if the U.S. Supreme Court would have gotten rid of it. It certainly is unconstitutional. Are there any of these things in which the national government is involved right now? And just because the national government is not supposed to be involved in something doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. But one of the very first things that I hope that all of us will do and teach others to do and so on is to first ask the constitutional question. Is it authorized by the Constitution? Does the national government have the authority to do it? Is it in Article 1, Section 8? That's a real good start. That'll cover about 95% of it. Is it in Article 1, Section 8? If not, it's reserved to the states and to the people respectively. I mean, there are some things that are not even the proper role of government at all, probably for the states. And I guarantee you, we would disagree on some of those things amongst ourselves here. But at least, if it were left to the states, Texas might have somewhat of a minimal welfare law. New York or California might have a lot more welfare expenditures, for example. Food and drugs, we might have cannabis, where are we, food and drugs. We might allow medical marijuana in Colorado, and they might not allow it in Texas. You might allow abortion in one state and not in another state. And after a while, it would have been, imagine this 50-state laboratory, different things, with some states would go broke, as some are bankrupt now, would go broke, and maybe they'd say, well, that's too expensive, we can't afford to do that, or we got to cut back on that or something. Or they would find out that practice was harmful to their state, and maybe there'd be some things that would be really good. Everybody wanted to have a gun in the back of their pickup, they come to Texas. Yes?
One thing left off there is religion.
Is what?
Religion.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot more than one thing left.
And healthcare. I put up some things on those.
Healthcare.
There's a few things.
Retirement.
Healthcare.
Marriage laws.
Marriage, we got family law up here. Marriage, abortion, adoption, divorce, and so on, marriage. Religion, however, the Constitution says that religion, there shall not be any laws about religion, even by the states. We'll get to that today, but the 14th Amendment, they used the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment to selectively apply every single thing in the Bill of Rights. Originally, the Bill of Rights applied only to the national government. They weren't worried about themselves, the states, they were just worried about this national government. They didn't want it to get out of hand, so they limited them with these 25 or so things we'll spend a whole week on that.
Well, don't you think the 14th Amendment has been misinterpreted?
I'm sure that it's been misinterpreted in some ways. I'm not enough of a scholar. I mean, I have my disagreements with the 14th Amendment. Well, I tell you what, we're going to get to the 14th Amendment tonight, so we've got these areas that are reserved to the states, and yet the national government's involved in them. National sovereignty over the areas that they're given specific powers, state sovereignty over everything else, including the things that we have over here. And together we call that dual sovereignty because we have two layers. Federalism, we call this whole system of dual sovereignty federalism. Federalism comes from the Latin word, I'm told, or Greek word, Greek word fetus, which means to combine or to join together. And so when the states said they said they would confederate, and they formed the Articles of Confederation. And then when they changed to a new constitution, they just called it the United States. They united together. When the states in the South, when we had the Civil War, the southern states confederated. So you had the Confederate States of America and the United States of America. I can't tell any difference in the names, really. But this system that we have of dual sovereignty, a sovereign national government in some few specific areas, and sovereign state governments then in all the other things that they reserved or retained residual powers to themselves. The very last clause, the necessary and proper clause on Article 1, Section 8, is Clause 18 that we just read, and it said that they can make laws, if it's not listed in there, they can make laws that are necessary and proper to carrying out some of these specific ones here. For example, and you've got written here McCulloch v. Maryland, which was a famous old case where the national government said they had a national bank. Now, whether that's a good or a bad thing is not our purpose tonight, but Alexander Hamilton was George Washington's Secretary of the Treasury, and that he pushed a national bank. We had a national bank, not like the Fed that we have today, but it was a true national bank. And they put one of their buildings right outside Washington, D.C. in Maryland. I guess around Chevy Chase, that would be a good place to have keep them back there. So they put one in Maryland, and Maryland said, that's fine, but you put a building, a business, and you got to pay taxes to us. And the national government said, oh, contraire, that's a constitutional power that we have. And so they went to court, and it went to the new U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court said, we agree with the national government. They argued, they used the necessary and proper clause, and they said a bank, having a national bank, is necessary and proper to carrying out some of these constitutional duties that we have, to coin money and regulate the value thereof, to borrow money on the credit of the United States. So those are banking functions, and they said it's constitutional for us to have a national bank. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, we agree with you, and therefore they said, yes, Maryland taxing that would be chilling one of the national government's constitutional powers. And so McCulloch v. Maryland is the first one to really establish the necessary and proper clause. But what I want to emphasize here is it's not the necessary and proper, the power for the national government to create whatever kind of laws are necessary and proper to be a good national government. It's just the ones that are necessary and proper to specifically carry out the foregoing 17 powers. We call that the implied powers or elastic clause sometimes. Okay, so Article 4. Now we're going to go on to Article 4. You remember in these 7 articles, 1 is the legislative branch, 2 is the executive branch, 3 is the judicial branch, the U.S. Supreme Court, all it was at that time, and that's the whole government. What are you going to do with the last 4? Well, the 4th one is, I call it state-to-state relations. I don't think they called it anything, but in the fourth one, there are 3 things that I mentioned here. If you want to turn to Article 4 in your constitutions, if you have it, even the little book, there's more of them back there. State-to-state relations. It says, just the first paragraph has all 3 of those things. No, it doesn't. Section 2 has. So it says, full faith and credit shall be given in each state to the public acts, records, and proceedings of another state. So, if you get married in one state and you go to another state, they got to recognize that. For purposes of their inheritance laws, they got to recognize that. Unless your state already had a law against it. So when Massachusetts and Connecticut started doing same-sex marriages, immediately, almost all the other states, their legislatures passed what are called DOMA, Defense of Marriage Acts, that define marriages between a man and a woman. And most of the states still have a Defense of Marriage Act. Defense of Marriage Act. And so if someone got married in Massachusetts, same-sex marriage, and came to Texas, then Texas can legally say, no, Article 4 does not require us to recognize that marriage for the purpose of our inheritance laws. Otherwise, it would. You buy a car somewhere, you bring it down here, you still own it. You buy land, you get property, any kind of legal things that you do in one state is recognized by another state. So that's full faith and credit. The next one, citizens of the United States shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states. What are privileges and immunities? What's the difference between that and full faith and credit? Privileges and immunities means certain states allow us, we talked about having a gun in the backseat of in the window of the pickup. We can do that here, but they can't do it in San Francisco. But in San Francisco, they can have same-sex marriage and they can have medical marijuana, and we can't do that here. If you go to Texas, from Texas to San Francisco, and say, I want to have a same-sex marriage, they can't say, no, you're a Texan. For whatever reasons, we're not going to let you do that. They have to grant you the same privileges and immunities that they would their own citizens there. And same thing with smoking marijuana. Or if they come here, we have to give them any privileges and immunities that are allowed by state law. That's all privileges. It's just state-to-state relations. And what's the third one there? Extradition. It's in there somewhere. Next paragraph. A person, so a guy commits a bank robbery here in Tyler and he flees to Shreveport. Well, this thing, so how do you get it back? It says that they flee from justice, can be, and they're found in another state, shall, on the demand of the executive authority of the state. Who's that? That's the governor. So the governor of Texas calls the governor of Louisiana, or writes or emails or something, and says, the guy ran away, and we have charged on him. Would you please extradite him, send him back out of Louisiana into Texas for us to have trial? That's extradition. And they had it constitutionally. The governor of Louisiana has to send him back. This is right here in the Constitution. All of these, everything that's on this glossary tonight is basically about the issue of, does the states have the power to do it, or does the national government have the power to do it? This is, I have suggested, probably the most abused. It's the biggest, not just the white elephant in the room. It's open to everybody and understands it. This is the thing that is being abused. I can't think of anything in the Constitution that's abused more. I mean, the Interstate Commerce Clause that we're going to talk about here is abused. The Necessary and Proper Clause is abused. But this is just every single day the national government is out there doing stuff that they have no constitutional authority whatsoever to do. Interstate Commerce Clause. It says in Article 1, Section 8 that they can make laws about commerce with the foreign governments, that's foreign commerce, and with interstate commerce. Let's watch that clip.
I don't think we have the volume set up. Do we, Chris?
Really? Hey, Chris, here? You're right. We don't have the volume. Bummer. Is there a way that would it be hard to set that up? We'd have to unhook me, right?
Yes.
I'd like to show that. It's 7 minutes, and it will be really good on interstate commerce. It's Judge Napolitano, it's a former federal district judge who also was on Fox News. And great guy, he's up there standing up by the Constitution, teaching it better than anyone ever does. When you have someone like that who's powerful, then either side always tries to co-opt to that and get him in. So they hired Judge Napolitano, but he didn't slow down at all. And he was going up and up and up in his ratings, and Bill O'Reilly couldn't rein him in, and so he fires him finally. And so Judge Napolitano is no longer with Fox News, but I recommend him highly. I don't know of anyone who speaks who does a better, more compelling job.
Oh, wait. So unplug that right there on the side.
While they're...
And that'll go there.
Yes. Thank you. while they're doing that, should I just turn this off, or you'll just turn me off?
Go ahead and turn it off.
Yeah, it's saying an error occurred, please try again later, so I don't know.
Well, if we can get that up, I really would like to watch that 7-minute video. Looking at your, we'll come back to the Interstate Commerce Clause here. Generally speaking, as Judge Napolitano will tell you, the Interstate Commerce Clause, back then it said that they had the power to regulate commerce among the several states. The idea of regulating was to keep it regular, is what the Founding Fathers said, to make sure that one state didn't stop people. The governor of one state from saying to other people in other states, you can't sell your goods over here, and to keep the flow of interstate commerce going, so that you didn't have the trade wars that they were having back at the time. Today, as we were talking about earlier here, somebody gave some examples, the national government regulates everything. You can't hardly come up with something that you're touching right now, or sitting on, or standing on, or thinking about that the national government doesn't regulate. We'll come back to that. I wrote down 5 euphemistic federalism phrases that we hear. You can just mark them all out if you want to, but I put them down there so that I can tell you that they're just euphemisms, and they don't. Dual federalism, for example, is just kind of redundant. Federalism means 2 layers.
Wow.
State government that's sovereign in certain areas, and national government that's sovereign in certain areas. So dual federalism. The new judicial federalism, that's just what it is, really. It's just violating or legislating from the bench in violation of the 10th Amendment, and allowing the federal government to be involved in all of the rest of these, pretty much of that. Conflicted federalism is a term that is used in college textbooks. It's kind of whiny. You know, it sounds like a mental disease. It says that they're conflicted, that the government, the Constitution is not clear about what the national government can do and what the states can do, and so we're conflicted over it. That's conflicted federalism. It's just silliness. Fiscal federalism. Fiscal has to do with control of the using fiscal or tax policy to, again, for the national government to exercise control. So the national government taxes us in various ways, and then they use that money to either bribe or force through states to do their will on certain things. For example, a good example of a bribe would be these concrete barriers that we have on Broadway and on 323 and so on. You may like them, and maybe you don't like them. Whether you like them or not, the national government doesn't have any right of being involved in it, and yet they say to them, here's billions of dollars, state of Texas, if you will do this, and they offer that, and our county could stop it, our city could stop it if they wanted to turn down the money, but they know it's hard to turn down the money, so I put that I call that bribes. Other things, pardon me?
Schools too.
Yeah, the schools too. Oh, yes! We'll come back to the other here in just a minute. Do the important stuff first. Can we back it up to the beginning, and we'll be able to...
That's it.
Peter's shift. There's a place to X out of that. Can you start it back at the beginning? Because we can't hear it yet anyway.
Yeah, this is as high as I can go right here.
That's as loud as it's going to
Can you all hear it?
No, not really.
Where's it coming out anyway? Up there?
It's only coming out of laptop?
It's not coming out of that. Can you stop it, Bob? We don't want, this is not just until we can get it louder. May as well start over when we can get it louder. If we can get it louder. Is that going to be it, Chris, you think?
I don't know. Should be connected correctly.
As far as through here, it's using the same mic connection. Got me in here. Yep. Yep, this is the input right here.
You want some good stuff on the Constitution, just Google Judge Napolitano on anything. And
That's everything.
he's a constitutionalist. He's a Robert Bork kind of a guy.
Let's see.
If you believe in the rule of law and believe in the Constitution, you'll love him. If you don't, if you want to loosen up a little bit, you probably won't like Judge Napolitano.
Yeah, we just don't have the volume.
Sorry.
Okay.
Huh? That volume's up, this volume's up, so it's amp there, it's amp here. Yeah, laptop volume is up also, in addition to the video. Yeah, yeah.
Could you all hear it at all?
No.
Are there captions available? Sometimes there's captions.
Could we just play it on the thing and have it, and use this mic?
You won't see the screen.
No, I'm talking about just put this on.
You just want to listen to him?
No, play it up there. and
Play it
have
on the
this-
laptop through
Play it on the laptop. We'll see it there and have the volume coming out here. Testing, 1, 2.
No, I gotta get back here now.
Should we do that? That'll make it loud. We'll finish up on the conflicted federalism. What was the other euphemism here? Cooperative federalism. Cooperative federalism is a term, it's just extortion. Cooperative federalism, a good example of it is the highway funds. It happens with every state. They say, if you want to get such and such, if you won't do such and such, you will lose your highway funds or your education funds. That's called cooperative federalism. That's extortion in my book, right? Those are just some terms that you hear, and as far as I'm concerned, you can mark them all out. The 14th, 16th, and 17th Amendments. Testing, testing. Let's turn this over to you all. These 14th, 16th, and 17th Amendments, the reason that I put them on there are three amendments that really made a difference, either in giving more power to the states or more power to the national government. The 14th Amendment, for example, has
Test.
It's coming out of this.
it's got a, how can I put this? The 14th Amendment, before we have the 14th, we haven't talked about the 5th Amendment yet, but in the 5th Amendment, which applied only to the national government, the first 10 amendments to begin with, said that they can't take away our life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And about 15 of the 25 unalienable rights that are in our Bill of Rights are due process things like a speedy trial and a fair trial and a jury trial of your peers and no torture and all that kind of stuff.
It's coming out of this.
Privacy and search and
There's
seizure.
no volume there.
And
It's
so
a
on.
line out.
Well, that was in the
So I
Fifth
don't know
Amendment,
anything
and that only applied to the national government. Then in the 14th Amendment, which was one of the 3 Civil War amendments, they passed these after the Civil War. 13 got rid of slavery, 14 had this equal protection and this control of the state stuff in it. It said, we're now ready to say to the states to apply everything in the Bill of Rights to the states. I'm not sure that's what they were thinking when they did the 14th Amendment, but they used the 14th Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause, saying that all citizens in states as well as national government, all citizens must be guaranteed equal protection of the law. So one case at a time, they selectively applied the Bill of Rights to the states, so that now it's not authorized to torture in the states. It's not authorized to establish a religion in the state. It's not authorized to limit their freedom of speech or religion or press or petition or assembly or your right to keep and bear arms and all these things that we have in the Bill of Rights. So the 14th Amendment limited the power of the states. It brought the state power more under control. The 16th Amendment is the national income tax. And of course, the national income tax gave great power to the national government. You give them more money, they can do all kinds of stuff with the national income tax. And the 17th Amendment is popular election of senators. In the original Constitution, U.S. senators were not elected by the people like we are here. They were elected, they were controlled by the state legislatures. The states wanted to make sure that those people in the U.S. Senate were loyal to their state and would protect their state's rights. And so you had, but when the 17th Amendment was passed in 1913, I believe, along with the 16th Amendment and the Federal Reserve Act and so on, it said that the senators would be elected popularly. And all of a sudden, the Senate went from being the most conservative, the most jealous of states' rights, because every 6 years they had to go back to the legislature, and the legislature would look at it and see whether or not they protected their states' rights or not. If they didn't, they get someone else. So they were really aware of and protective of states' rights until the 17th Amendment passed, and now you've got Cornyn or Cruz, and we have 10% approval ratings all over it, 9-10% nationally, and yet we re-elect both the House and the Senate at over 90% rate. last statistics I saw in 2010 were 95% for the House and 93% for the Senate. And so it's not as hard they don't have to worry that much about states. And all of a sudden, the Senate, for the last 60, 70 years, has been the most, if you want to call it liberal, but the least constitutional, the least protective of states' rights, when they were the most protective of it prior to the 17th Amendment. So the 16th and 17th Amendments gave a lot more power to the national government. They could get away with a lot more. Are we ready to try that?
Well, you're just going to be able to listen.
We can't play and just stick the microphone up right to the...
Under the Constitution.
That's okay. He's ugly.
Regulate healthcare. Obviously, it can't. Healthcare is not mentioned in the Constitution. The framers had doctors. The framers had hospitals. The framers got sick. The framers needed healthcare. It was beyond their wildest imaginings that they would be creating a government that would feature...
Can y'all hear that well enough now?
The other day I had a piece in the Wall Street Journal about whether or not the Congress could, under the Constitution, regulate health care. Obviously, it can't. Health care is not mentioned in the Constitution. The framers had doctors. The framers had hospitals. The framers got sick. The framers needed health care. It was beyond their wildest imaginings that they would be creating a government that would somehow be able to regulate this kind of human behavior. But they did give the Congress a very unique power called the power to regulate interstate commerce. Madison argued that to regulate means, and this is what it meant at the time, if you have an Oxford English Dictionary, which gives you the history of the meaning of words throughout history, to regulate meant to keep regular. It meant to make sure that there is commerce between the states, not to allow the Congress to regulate everything under the sun, like the conditions of employment or the hourly wages or the materials used to make up the article that moves in interstate commerce, but just to make sure that interstate commerce is regular, to prevent, for example, the state of Pennsylvania from saying to merchants in New Jersey, you can't sell your goods here, only local merchants in Pennsylvania can sell them. That's what the Commerce Clause was written for. But Congress, of course, has used it to regulate the air that you breathe and the water that you drink and the force of the shower in your home and the size of your toilet bowl and the number of legs on your desk chair and on and on and on. Do you know that the Congress has used the Interstate Commerce Clause to make it a crime for you to speak the truth?
Can you pause that, Bob?
If an FBI agent shows up at your...
He just said that the government has used the Interstate Commerce Clause to make it a crime to tell the truth. I just want to give you some quick background. You may recall that during revolutionary times, or colonial times, the soldiers could come with the writs of assistance. A writ of assistance was where they just showed up to your house and they wrote out their own deal that authorized them to come into your house and do whatever they wanted and so on. It was a writ of assistance. They didn't have to have a warrant like you have to have today. That is the main reason that we have the Fourth Amendment that says you've got to have a probable cause shown by legitimate someone who, under oath and affirmation, goes before a magistrate and gives probable cause to show that a crime has or is about to be committed, something like that. And then they give a warrant, a search warrant, specifically describing the things to be searched for and the places and so on. Well, back then they just wrote out their own writs of assistance. We have those today. They're called self-written search warrants. I think the Patriot Act calls them roving warrants or something like that, but he'll tell you about those now. It's just worse now than what it was. It's worse because of this unbelievable law that, so he's telling you about that.
House with a self-written search warrant. The agent will tell you, you may not tell anyone about this. You may not tell your spouse in the bedroom. You may not tell a priest in the confessional. You may not tell your lawyer in her or his office. You may not tell anyone in whom you confide. You can't even answer truthfully in a courtroom under oath whether or not you received one of these warrants without violating the Patriot Act. Well, in Bridgeport, Connecticut, 2 FBI agents showed up and delivered one of these handwritten search warrants to an 86-year-old librarian. She looked at them and said, "Who the hell are you and what the hell is this?" And she handed it to her 76-year-old assistant, whereupon they were arrested because she revealed to another human being that the FBI had come calling. They were indicted and they were tried. And your federal government attempted to put an 86-year-old librarian and her 76-year-old assistant in a federal prison for 5 years because they told people that federal agents came calling with a self-written search warrant. Do you really think you have the power to do that under the Constitution? Now, the words that I just articulated are not mine. They're the words of the very courageous federal judge to whom, fortunately for the defendants and unfortunately for the government, this case was assigned. Because after the jury was impaneled, the government decided to withdraw the charges. They somehow thought that they would lose the case. The judge was about to declare the Patriot Act unconstitutional. Now you see how insidious the government is. If there's no case in front of a judge, then the judge loses the power to declare the law on which the case is based unconstitutional. So fearing that this courageous federal judge in Bridgeport, Connecticut, would declare the law unconstitutional, not caring what it did to the life of the 86-year-old or the 76-year-old, not concerned with its oath to uphold the Constitution, it simply withdrew the case and went about serving self-written search warrants and telling people, if you tell anyone about it, we'll come after you because you spoke the truth. So the same government now wants to use the same powers under the Constitution to regulate health care. Let's see. Medicare broke. Social Security broke. Medicaid broke. Amtrak broke. The post office broke. Who in their right mind with that track record would give health care to the same people that have broken everything they've tried to manage? Ask your member of Congress, whoever she or he may be, where in the Constitution is it authorized for the federal government to regulate health care? They will not be able to answer that question. Now, these gatherings to which I am privileged to attend. Last Saturday, I spoke to 25,000 people in the pouring rain in Fort Worth, Texas, and a month before that, to about 10,000 people in Columbus, Ohio. These gatherings are more important than anything you can imagine, because in the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its maximum hour of danger. You are that generation. This is your role. Now is that time. Freedom must be defended from every assailant in every corner of this country, from outside the country, from inside the country, and especially from the government that wants to take it away from us. God bless you.
Well, he's right. To summarize for tonight, we could have just put Article 1, Section 8 versus the 10th Amendment. If we could just get this in, if we could just understand and have the courage of our, could have the conviction in the first place, and the courage of our convictions to stand by this in all the different areas in which we're involved, then Obamacare would have never passed. I'm not arguing the merits of it. Maybe it's a wonderful deal. But it's the national government has no business doing it whatsoever. And he's saying we're the ones that have to do it. Why is it that the national government has been able to take over all of these areas when we have a constitution that doesn't allow it? George Washington gave us the answer. He said, the people are the last guardians of the Constitution because the government won't do it. The legislative branch, Congress, won't do it. It limits their power. It restricts them only to those specific limited powers that are in the Constitution. The executive, the president, won't do it because it restricts his power only to not even make any law whatsoever. Executive orders, treaties that doesn't get ratified and so on. It doesn't, it limits his power, and the judiciary, the U.S. Supreme Court, the federal courts, it limits their power. They're limited to upholding the Constitution. They're politicians. They're there because, at least on the U.S. Supreme Court and the circuit courts, because they have a political slant. All of these things, the Constitution is in the way. It's just human nature, even for good people, to go ahead and make decisions and do things, whatever they can get away with, to promote what they think is right. And I suppose there are some evil people that are doing it just for their own power and gain also. But we've got plenty of useful idiots enough without having evil people doing what's wrong. It's up to you and I. But the only way that you and I can do it is to understand what's right and wrong. As Cicero said, to understand, he's talking about natural law. He said the laws of nature and of nature's God. For us to understand what are God's laws, what are his correct political and legal principles, and marital and sociological and whatever other health principles and so on. But in this case, we're talking about legal and political principles. For us to understand those principles and have a set of standards for us individually, which may vary with us, but we do the very best that we can in our spheres of influence to stand up for these things. I believe that, I have no doubt that these kinds of things are very worthwhile for each one of us individually. No telling what we can do in our various, we have different interests that we have and so on. That's pretty much it. Federalism is state versus national here. The national has taken over everything. Just virtually everything. And we've got to restrict them back to their constitutionality if we want to have the rule of law. If we don't care about the rule of law and we're ready to have divine power, right of kings or tyranny or dictatorship or something that's very efficient, then the way we're going is just fine. Tim?
Okay, so if we look at the very first clause under Section 8, and...
In which amendment?
Section 8, Article 1, Section 8.
Okay.
We could read it as follows. The Congress shall have power to provide for the general welfare of the United States. Isn't that what is primarily being used to justify this gross expansion of federal activities? And if so, how do we address that? How do we counter that argument? The general welfare clause.
I'll give you my quick answer from historical. Maybe he has some other answers too. But for the first, up until about, I think it was 1932, and do you recall the case? It's been 45 years from now. I always want to say Baker v. U.S., but it was some Supreme Court case when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was trying to get his social programs in and so on. And for the first time, they discovered this here, and they discovered the general welfare clause in the introduction. We're saying here's the 6 general principles, and on this one it says Congress shall have power to tax us, to pay the debts, to provide for the common defense, and general welfare. Back then, they didn't call what we call welfare payments to individuals to help them with health and food and whatever. They called it public charity, was the term that they used for years. They didn't use the term welfare like we did. So that's my argument. We know what the intent of the legislators is. We know what the Founding Fathers said. This had nothing to do with what we call welfare today. It was, they didn't allow public charity back then. You've probably all heard the Davy Crockett story about Sockdolager, and if you haven't, just go Google it on the internet and read it. It's powerful. He was a truly great man. I mean, he grew up like a wild animal after he left the house and traveled 200 miles when he was 8 or 10 years old. And if you've ever read his original autobiography, you can't hardly understand the language. He was literally like a wolf or something talking. He was like ominous and anyway, and he becomes a great man, and he had a great heart, but he made a mistake and voted for public charity in one case. In this Horatio Bunce, one of his. You need to read the story. He swore that after that he would never again vote against the Constitution, and he didn't. He was faithful to that. He was a great man. Then he went to the Alamo and did something else sacred.
Yeah, my thoughts, Tim, on that same question would be to demand that they read the rest of the paragraph. Because I run into that in so many times in chatting with folks. They quote that entry line as a blank check, and you know, the founders even talked about there would have been no reason to specify the 18 things right after that if there wasn't a specific list of that.
We're in the question and answer period now. Yes.
This is a biggie. Your opinion.
Or anybody else's opinion.
Can we get this fixed?
Oh, gosh. Okay. Anybody else want to
No, answer.
We're going to get it fixed. It's going to be fixed one way or the other. I give you my answer. They can't fire me. They can't pay me less than what they're paying right now. So we're going to get it fixed eventually. The question is if we're going to lose America and the freedoms that we have right now, if we're going to lose the United States of America. If we do lose the freedoms, we go in the direction we're going, we're going to lose it. We're losing it right now. And the only way you ever get it back is by bloodshed, as Thomas Jefferson and others said. We'll get them back one way or the other. People have been implanted with the spirit of liberty. And now, get religious on you here for a minute. I believe that when Christ comes, that he is going to implement his law, the rule of law. Isaiah was right. Christ is the law. And this natural law is the law of Christ. If it's just out there in the clouds, in the ether, if we can get at it on every single issue, there is absolute truth. Moral relativism is a bunch of bunk. I know we're getting away from the Constitution here, but it's necessary. It's what the founders believed. And when he comes, he will implement his law. There has to be a people prepared who understand correct principles so there can be a natural segue, politically, legally, spiritually, in all ways, I believe, personally. I don't know if we're going to save it. I don't know if when he comes again, if the United Nations flag is going to be waving here, or if the Russian or Chinese flag is going to be waving here. Anyone else have any comments? All I know is we have to do the very best we can. And
yes.
I have great hope.
I've been doing this for 6 years. This is what we're doing right now is crucial to fixing anything. But what else is critical is becoming involved in the local level as much as you can. Now, this is a calendar I put up. It's the homelandownersassociation.com is the website. It's got everything on the left is anybody that contacts you. The next thing coming up is, well, Commissioner's Court today, Tyler ISD tomorrow, Commissioner's Court, City Council, and then early voting begins. So anyway, you click on these things, it expands with all the information about where it is, how you can talk, what the agenda is, and so on. What we got to do when we have time, and you shouldn't feel guilty if you can't get there, but if you can, you really should be showing up at these things. And if you can learn enough from here to talk like Judge Napolitano, those people will start listening, and in turn, that will have a reach much broader than that room that you're in. And they'll start listening at the state level, and at
All
the
levels.
national level. We got to stand up and start doing something, and this is where you can do it, and the calendar on the right are the people you can do it with.
Not everybody has to get so involved that you run for president, or you run for U.S. Senate, or U.S. House, or State Senate, or State House, or Attorney General of Texas so you can be the next governor. You know, anybody in this in here might want to run for a school board. The school board, a lot of those things, there's just no battles to go on over there. And that's the battle for the curriculum. People who understand these kind of things in the school board can say, we're not going to have Common Core here in Texas. And as a matter of fact, that has happened to some extent here in Texas. There are several states that have said, no, we've opted out of Common Core. And others that had done it before, there are 6 or 8 of them that have said, have now rescinded their involvement in Common Core because of people like yourself that run for the school board. This is important.
Speaking of Common Core, tomorrow night at 8:30, there's a conference call, there's the dial-in, there's the access code. This is a nationwide conference call with some people that started it in Texas, and they're raising a lot of ruckus all over the country. And it's a way you can, if education is your interest, this is how you can get involved and learn what you can do.
There are innumerable areas that we could get involved. Okay, other questions and comments?
Thursday is, if you want to know about Iranians, the Smith County Republican Women's Club is having a meeting at 11:30. Kathy Adams of the Eagle Forum will be there. She's got a lot of reach, and there's going to be a lot of...
Great outfit, Eagle Forum. Anybody could do worse than to get involved in Eagle Forum. It's generally speaking a women's organization, but men can join it too, and I have more respect for them than any political organization in the country.
Bob, can you pass it out, email?
Can you write down Homeland Owners
Homeland Owners?
Association.com.
We can put it in one of the, thanks for coming.
It's in every email I sent out. It's down at the bottom in red, white, and blue.
Okay, Ori, questions?
I just wanted to comment. One of the other main things that I see that you can do to get involved, parents, teach your kids these things. Because I didn't learn these things in school, and I pay attention in school. I bet you there's a lot of kids who don't pay attention in school, and even those who do are not going to learn this.
They're not being taught this.
The majority of liberal voters are young people, so you want to reduce that demographic, teach your kids.
Our whole society is taught to just go right to the merits. If you could just get people to not ask the constitutional question, you've won most of the battle. Because if you ask the constitutional question on all these different political issues, about 80–90% of the time, the simple answer is, it's not there in Article 1, Section 8. The national government has no business being involved in it. It's legitimate for the state government to get involved in it, maybe, unless the Constitution also limits the states.
One other thing you can do, and you can help me with this, we need to practice on this broadcast so that it's understandable from anybody from now on YouTube, you know, where it's well produced. But anyway, this is broadcast live. I sent out an email to everybody on our list, and it's also archived on YouTube. So when somebody asks you, what did you do today? Well, I went to the Constitution class. Here, look.
So we'll need to get a roving camera or something because we don't.
No, this.
Back and forth
No, this works okay, but we got to fix the lighting on the screen. We got to do. You know.
We got a lot of
Anyway.
details. We'll have another class that will start here in probably a couple or 3 months, and this time we'll do more advertising and so on. And y'all are the guinea pigs. So I'm sorry, this is the first time.
But you can't learn this stuff too much.
No, you can't. You can't. And the more we go over it. Okay. Any other questions or comments for tonight? I'm pretty. Yes.
Okay. To me, as far as education is concerned, if the states had taken care of educating all children, then the federal government would have never gotten involved.
There may be some truth in that, and the justification is, well, gee, if the states don't do their job, then the federal government has the right to get involved. No, they don't. The national government doesn't have the right to get involved. If the states want to have lousy education, it's true that the national government's going to have, it's easier for them to get away with it. But they're still getting away with something. It's not legal. it's not constitutional for the national government to be involved, in education. And if the national government doesn't right, gee, then maybe it's okay for the United Nations to control education if our national government's not doing it right. That's certainly the argument the United Nations uses in a lot of different areas. That's illegal and unconstitutional.
Education worldwide, as far as Western nations and everything, we're 32nd.
Well, what the U.S. Constitution is all about, Christy has the answers here, but I'll finish my sentence. What the U.S. Constitution is all about is saying the United States Constitution is the supreme law of the land. There may be some brighter, more holy people out there or something, but it doesn't matter. We have rule of law in this country, and we, the people, have written down the law of sheep. We're going to follow it, or we change it, amend it, and allow something else. Christy?
I think that argument should be applied to anything.
Yeah.
We can say that on any front. Well, this isn't being done well enough, and so we need to move it to a higher source. But the higher the source, the further removed they are from the problem. And I would argue that I don't think the federal government has done anything to improve the education. I think it's gotten worse since the federal government got involved. My children's education is pitiful compared to, my education wasn't perfect, and I came from a small town with a small school, and I look at the resources that are being used now and the things that are being taught. My kids are not learning the basics. We have to augment so much at home. And all of my children have qualified for gifted talent. They are all gifted and talented, and I cannot imagine if they did not have the natural ability that they have, how pitiful this education would be serving them. But I can tell you, they are not getting an education that matches their abilities.
And if we're honest with ourselves, we will, if anybody who looks at it will see...
They are still failing, and they're failing worse than they were 20 years ago.
Right.
The national government really does appear to their goals really do appear to be social engineering. They're not really excited about the math and reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Could I just point out, as a teacher, the state of Texas opted out of Common Core. They did not receive any federal money, and they said, we won't do it. But what has happened is the book companies have taken the federal standards and have erased the name Common Core and have sold them in the state of Texas. And your children are receiving Common Core standards. And the people who have the power are the parents. The teachers have no power. And if we say anything, then we are reprimanded on different levels. But Texas is teaching Common Core, and people don't know it because the book companies have given it to you.
And the really bad thing about it is they passed a law recently where half of the curriculum is going to be online. Half of it's going to be in books. We can look at the books and review. I helped with that some. But the stuff that's online is almost invisible to parents or anybody that's interested.
The people who are testing are actually from out of the United States. The testing companies are from England, and they make the tests, and the tests are designed to fail 70% of students. And the people who grade the tests are not teachers. They advertise different places and hire other people to grade the tests. Teachers are signed to secrecy. We cannot even talk about it.
This is the reason, we could spend hours, days, weeks, you could go infinitely just talking about education because it's so important and it so needs to be controlled locally, and it is so not controlled locally, even when we opt out of it, as you say, and yet people can do something about that. They're on local and state school boards.
Because parents have the power.
Yes.
Absolutely.
But parents have to know what's going on. They have to be willing to take the time to do it. Just Eric and then Chris, you did have your hand up.
You mind? I'm going to go just
briefly.
2 minutes.
Just question and answer, so go ahead.
I'm not a public speaker, so I'm going to make this real quick. About 3 years ago, I got involved in the Patriot movement because I wanted to make a difference in my country. A bunch of people saw my passion and ended up being the Sergeant at Arms of the 4th Continental Congress. This is the Continental Militia Network. It covers the Congress. It covers an activist organization called Citizens Action Network. I love the question that you asked, sir, about what we can do if we can reboot. That's what we need right here. This is your reboot right here. The 4th Continental Congress, I'm working with some constitutional scholars on committees of safety and committees of correspondence that we need in our local communities. That's where it starts. It starts with the local, the committees of correspondence, the committees of safety, and they send delegates to the Congress. It's 250 delegates to the Congress. It represents every state in the union. It's 1 senior, 4 junior delegates. I would highly recommend that you all get a copy of this and read through it and get involved. If all you can do is just hit me up on Facebook. My name is Eric C. Ron. My last name is spelled R-A-H-N, and I can get you involved in whatever part of CONMODAT that you want to be a part of, whether it's civilian representation in the Congress, to provide the civilian oversight for the militias, whether it's activism, open carry movement, whatever it is. You can get involved. This is how it gets done.
And it's in quick support of Eric. The militia deal, you know, there are people, the militia, oh, that's fringe kind of stuff and so on. The militia is a real constitutional thing, but there's a whole lot of misunderstanding about the militia. We could have a long course on just the militia alone, and people who are brighter than I am, will disagree on various things and so on. But we're going to take a little bit of time on the militia. It'll be too brief in this particular course, but it is an important thing for us to understand. It will be a part of our society. Chris?
I just wanted to say back on education, it almost seems that the stance we need to take is education is about educating. It is not about the business of education, which is what the government is in as far as subsidies, driving a program, giving money to the schools that are supposedly helping the kids, you know, providing, but yet pushing an agenda, right? But the people that are speaking out as far as education for the sake of education are really those that homeschool their children, that take them out of that that system, right? The textbooks, everything, school lunch programs, all these things you see.
The pre-K at 3 years old is breaking up the family and making everybody.
Program. It's not education for the sake of education, right?
I believe that. I believe that. But even if it was the most wonderful, correct curriculum, whatever the national government is doing and so on, it's still not legal. And the reason that it's not legal is the states said, we don't trust you, national government. On these kinds of things, we want them as close to home as possible. In fact, we want to control everything about government as close to home as possible, and that's why we're reserving all these very important things to us: police powers, education, and we give you these specific limited areas of things because we have to do naturalization on a national level. We have to do patent law. We have to do armies and navies, the major thing that the national government does. We have to do these things in Article 1, Section 8 on the national level, but we don't trust you to do this stuff because even if you might have a bunch of really good stuff, we're afraid that you might start using it for control, as all the nations have done for the history of mankind.
Great ideas don't need force.
Kristen.
In response to your question, you know, we really can make a difference. And we may not be able to get it back all in one day or all at once, but I just read 2 articles today that show that we can make a difference. And people are starting to wake up. I've been reading about education today, and I just read an article about the, hard for me to summarize, but they were talking about the No Child Left Behind law is being reviewed and they're currently looking at reducing the testing or removing the federal government all the way and turning the power back to the states because there has been so much protest from parents across the country. And also, like KDISD down just outside of Houston, they just came out with a statement recently that they're going to cut way back on the testing that they're doing. The only testing that will remain is what's required by the federal laws because the parents have been in such an outcry and have been really passionately fighting against this. And so we really can make a difference if we get out there and we find out what's going on and we start protesting and trying to take back the reins.
If you want to do something, Thursday night, TISD has their board meeting, And the question that I would like to have asked by everybody in this room is when you built all those new elementary schools at almost $300 a square foot, saying it would improve our education, we had 4 failing schools. Now that we have all these brand new high dollar schools, we have 11. Why is that?
Because
What are we doing wrong?
the tests are designed for 70% of students to fail. They are not appropriate
Okay.
testing.
So anyway, we got to show up
And there are
locally
differences.
and
I
put
mean,
some pressure on them.
Differences are being made, but things are polarizing. I know of at least a dozen people in this room that are heavily involved in various organizations and so on. I don't know half the people in this room. The bottom line is each of us have to learn more and get involved, get out of our comfort zones and turn off Gilligan's Island maybe or something, and take a little bit more time doing things. Thank you. I'm excited about next week. We'll talk about the Bill of Rights.